You have found the Behind the Lines podcast presented by BetMGM, looking at week 2 in the National Football League. But first, a look back at the week that was sports betting in week 1, whether it was a big public win, big public loss. Look at some of the opening odds for week number 2, and I also will share an opening bet for week 2. My name is Stephen Andress, managing editor at thelines.com, joined each and every week on this show by Christian Cipollini over at BetMGM. Christian, hello. How was week 1?
Hey, yeah, it was a good one for the book. Nothing too crazy, but in all, it ended up being a winning week.
Okay, so overall, good, profitable week for BetMGM. So what were some of the public losses that led to that?
Yeah, so the two primetime games, Sunday night and Monday night, ended up being a bit of a wash. The Giants Cowboys, we had more money on Giants money line, but then Cowboys on the spread, we had more there, so ended up kind of washing out. And then last night we were a little bit more on the Bills, so we had a slight winner there. So nothing crazy on the primetime games, but we did have two Sunday night games we lost big, and then two that we won big, where we had about 90% of the action on one way or the other.
Des- Despite the win for the book this week, you said it was a slight win. Therefore, I'm assuming there were at least some notable public wins out there. So what were those?
Yeah, so we had a few games of those. One a public win would have been Jags Colts. We had about 90% of our money on the Jags. They ended up coming through, and then the other one that was a big public winner was Ravens Texans. Same thing. We couldn't write almost any bets on the Texans. It was all coming in Ravens.
I'm assuming the Texans are right there with the Cardinals when it comes to teams that you're going to have trouble getting bets on this year.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the flip side of that, the team that helped us out was the Cardinals, because somehow, some way, we did have 90% of our money coming in on the Commanders throughout the day, which was crazy. And the other game that we won on 90% of the money was Vikings Bucks. We had pretty close to 90 there on the Vikings as well.
None of that money on the Vikings was from the lines.com staff. I can promise you that. We were almost a not or sorry, early morning over here, unanimously on the Bucks to cover that spread. So a good one for our staff there, for sure. All right, let's look ahead here to week number 2 in the National Football League and the opening lines over at BetMGM. As always, we start with Thursday Night Football, a repeat of week 2 last year, where we have the Minnesota Vikings playing the Philadelphia Eagles. Spread and total for this one, please, Christian.
Yeah, Eagles are 7-point favorites at home here with a 48.5-point total.
And I believe that, did it ever touch 7.5 for you guys? I mean, you saw some buyback early in the week here on the Vikings. I'm pretty sure that we had 7.5 across the board to open here, and maybe a little bit of interest in the Vikings early in the week.
Yeah, a lot of that comes from anytime we open it at 7.5, right around the number. Sometimes those sharps really like to grab that hook in case they think it's going to go the other way, which it did here. So
Our sister podcast, Beat the Closing Number, with Eli Hershkovich and Mo Nawara, touched on this game. They didn't have a bet in it, but they thought that 7.5 might have been too rich, and there might have been a little bit of action to come in on the Vikings. Go listen to that podcast on our feed or on our YouTube channel. You can hear all the reasons why they thought maybe this matchup could be a little bit different than the slaughtering that the Eagles put on the Vikings a year ago. And also, Mo Nawara had some very strong takes about how the Eagles offense looked in week 1 compared to what we saw a year ago against one of the easiest schedules in the NFL. So again, go check out the Beat the Closing Number podcast to hear all of those takes and opinions as well. Okay, Christian, the early window, the 1:00 window Eastern time, another good day for Red Zone. It appears loaded schedule here for 1:00.
yeah, for sure. Chargers Titans. Chargers are 3-point favorites on the road, 45.5-point total. And on to Packers Falcons. Packers are 1.5-point favorites here on the road with a 40.5-point total. Colts Texans. Colts are 1.5-point favorites on the road with a 40-point total. Seahawks Lions. Lions are 6-point favorites at home, 49-point total. Bears at Bucks. Bucks are 3-point favorites at home here with a 41.5-point total. Raiders Bills. Bills open up as 9-point favorites at home with a 47-point total. Chiefs Jaguars. Chiefs are 3-point favorites on the road with a 51.5-point total, one of the highest totals of the week. Ravens Bengals. Bengals are 3.5-point favorites with a 46.5 point total. And that's the last of the 1 o'clocks.
All right, so I want to touch on the Kansas City Chiefs here, and I want to ask you a question because each week at thelines.com, we put together our power rankings, and we don't do it looking at who we think is going to win the Super Bowl. We do it as a snapshot for that particular week. So this week, week 2, we ranked 1 to 32 based on who we would have favored on a neutral field. So I want to ask you about the Kansas City Chiefs because they did not look good. Obviously lost the opener as a pretty decent favorite against the Detroit Lions. No Travis Kelce in that game. No Chris Jones in that game. Chris Jones has now signed. He should be back in week 2. But we're still waiting on whether Travis Kelce is going to play or not at this juncture as we record on Tuesday morning. So first question to you, when Travis Kelce is on the field for the Chiefs, who is your number 1 team that would be favored over every other on a neutral field?
When he's on the field, it's for sure the Chiefs.
Okay. And now I'm going to ask you the opposite after what we saw in week 1. If Kelce is not on the field after what we saw, who is your number 1 team to be favored over all the others on a neutral field?
Yeah, now that really opens up a can of worms after that because there's a couple teams that are in there. I mean, the Chiefs certainly didn't look good without him at all. They had really no flow going and without, and their other pass catchers looking pretty bad, dropping the ball. At that point, probably just the Eagles and 49ers, maybe the Bills at that point, probably the Bills. After that, it probably gets pretty close to still even. But yeah, it gets tight there. Yeah.
So Travis Kelce does matter to the spread for you guys. I mean, you would say that movement you saw in week 1 to make the Chiefs a smaller favorite when he got injured was justified.
It ended up being almost 3 points. So yeah, which is like similar to what a quarterback would be. It shows how important he just is for that team. And you saw it. They couldn't move the ball. Everyone else couldn't catch the ball. They just looked off.
Yeah, for me, just to kind of give one man's opinion, I had the Eagles as the number 1 team in week 1 and also this week in week 2. I just feel like this is a well-rounded all-around roster. And if not for one fumble return for a touchdown in the Super Bowl, I think the Eagles are Super Bowl champs over the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think you're seeing a situation where the Eagles have taken advantage of a very cheap quarterback and surrounded him with as much as possible. And the Kansas City Chiefs are now in that window with a very expensive quarterback, and they're having to hit on draft picks. To their credit, they've done it with their defense. They've really hit on some important draft picks. But if Kelce's not there, they need to figure some stuff out at the wide receiver position for sure. So I say 1 and 2. In reality, it's more like 1 and 1A, but those two are the clear top there. And, from what we saw from the 49ers in week 1, coming right out of the gates after they've had slow starts, starting 3 and 4 each of the past 2 years before eventually going very deep in the playoffs. I think people need to maybe pump the brakes on wondering when Brock Purdy is going to play poorly, because I'm not sure it's going to happen. So that's just a thought there for me on power rankings. And Christian, thank you for your insight on that. Very interesting situation with Travis Kelce. We'll see whether or not he plays in week number 2 here. One other game I just want to touch on here. You mentioned that the Indianapolis Colts as small favorites on the road against the Houston Texans. One thing I got dead wrong in week 1, and we're always going to try and be as transparent as possible here at thelines.com. I took the Texans plus 10 in week 1, and I did not factor in nearly enough the kind of, I don't know how to term this, I'll just say a ton of injuries on the offensive line. 6 guys now on IR on the offensive line for the Houston Texans, 3 starters. It just, you can't function like that when you have a rookie head coach, a rookie quarterback, and they just couldn't get anything going on offense with just the deficiencies they had in protection. So I'm not extremely high on the Colts and Anthony Richardson. I think, it's a pretty volatile situation offensively, but the offensive line for the Texans might be in for another long day with DeForest Buckner and company getting some pressure against that Texans offensive line and the backups that are in there. So just another note there. Haven't locked it in yet. As always, we lock in our bets as a staff over on our Discord channel. Go to thelines.com, top right corner. Hit that Discord button, and you can follow all the staff bets all season long. Okay, Christian, let's move ahead now to the late window on Sunday. Opening spreads and totals over at BetMGM.
Yeah, 4 o'clock window. Giants at the Cardinals. Giants are 4.5 point favorites on the road with a 40 point total. 49ers at Rams. 49ers are 8.5-point favorites on the road with a 44.5-point total. Jets, Cowboys. Cowboys are 8.5-point favorites now at home with a 41.5-point total. And last of the 4 o'clocks, Commanders, Broncos. Broncos are 3.5-point favorites with one of the lowest totals of the weekend, 38.5.
If you wouldn't mind, just repeat that spread one more time for Cowboys and Jets.
8.5.
Okay. This number on the look ahead was 3. So basically what you're telling me that Rodgers down to Zach Wilson at the moment is about 5.5 points.
Yeah, that'd be it.
That's very interesting. And I wonder as well about Zach Wilson against a much more ferocious pass rush with Nathaniel Hackett calling the plays for Zach Wilson. Yeah, I don't know what the number is to bet the Jets this week, but this ain't it. It would. I'm going to be looking very hard about whether I want to bet the Cowboys this week, given the potential protection issues there and what they just did to the Giants' offensive line. So, might be a very happy New York opening 2-0 for the Dallas Cowboys. One other question I want to ask you is about the San Francisco 49ers. You know, they were a very small favorite at Pittsburgh to close last week. A lot of interest on the Steelers in that game. And now the Niners go on the road and play the Rams, who were very impressive in week 1 against the Seattle Seahawks, and they are more than a touchdown favorite. And, you know, often the storylines about week number 2 when you're handicapping games in the NFL is looking for the overreaction. What team has been adjusted too much in the market? And I just wonder if this isn't necessarily an overreaction about the 49ers, but more just adjusting a mistake that was the line in week number 1 where they were expecting the Niners to start slow, and now we're actually back to the proper market rating on the 49ers. Where do you land in that debate?
Yeah, it's probably closer to. We took a ton of sharp action too in that week 1 game against the Steelers that really kept shifting that line. It ended up getting down to the 49ers -1, I believe, right around kickoff. I think there was probably, I guess, a lot of question marks around Brock Purdy and make sure he was still healthy coming off that injury. But yeah, other than that, it seems like this team's really good. And why were they 2-point favorites against it? You know, the Steelers there. It seems crazy at this point. But they looked very, very good. And I feel like this 8.5 number is going to get some two-way action or probably just 49ers action, actually.
Yeah, and maybe some teaser action for me, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah.
So we get that down under 3 on the two game 6-point teaser here. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think you know, we had a little talk about it in the Lions staff Discord channel and also on Slack, and the consensus was basically yeah, the Niners are still really good. And you kind of mentioned that in the debate about number 1 power rating if Kelsey's out, and you had the Niners kind of in the mix there in the conversation of being in that top tier, and rightfully so. So not every big adjustment from a preseason look-ahead line to week 2 is an overreaction. Sometimes it's a proper reaction. So I tend to think that's the case here with the 49ers. Prime time, Christian. We have not just one Monday Night Football game this week. We have 2. But first, let's talk about this Sunday night game with the belle of the ball in week 1, the Miami Dolphins at the New England Patriots.
Yeah, Dolphins 2.5-point favorites on the road here, 47.5-point total. For our Monday night, Saints Panthers, the first one. Saints are 3.5-point road favorites, 40.5-point total. And then the final one of Monday night, Browns at Steelers. Browns are 2.5-point favorites on the road with a 40-point total.
I thought I would be running to the window to bet the Dolphins under 3 here, and then I thought about it a little bit more and more, and I was really impressed by the Patriots' defense in week number 1. You know, maybe you can chalk that up to the Eagles not playing their starters in the preseason, but I was very skeptical of this defense going into the season. They got all but one of their wins against terrible quarterbacks last year. But they showed up against Philly and looked pretty good. And I also thought that, you know, hey, what do you know? Having a real offensive coordinator actually helps when you have a young quarterback in Mac Jones. So Bill O'Brien, I thought, did pretty well in week 1 against one of the elite teams in the NFL. And also just the matchup with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle on the outside. It's very interesting to me that Belichick went out and got two corners who run 40 times in the 90th to 100th percentile for their size and speed. So they went out and made a concerted effort to get speed on the outside, knowing that they have some speedy receivers in their division, none faster than Tyreek Hill. So very interesting matchup here for me. So I just I'm going to think about this game a little bit more. Maybe on the Friday Megapod, I will still bet the Dolphins, but just not quite sure yet about that. And lastly for me, the Monday night game, the early bet I did lock in. Christian, you said the Browns are -2.5 right now.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so this has moved, and let's talk about this a little bit before we wrap up here. I did bet Browns on the money line when it was -122 on the money line, so a little bit early. I think anything under 3 here is appropriate if Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth are out. Now that it's -2.5, I would want to just confirm that's the case. When we were getting basically close to a pick 'em on the money line on Monday, I didn't care, and it was worth the risk to just take it. With a low total like this of 40, it's never Cleveland for me if this gets to -3. But if Freiermuth and Johnson, Kenny Pickett's two favorite targets last season, are out for this game, this number is basically where it's basically more respect for the Rams on the road in Pittsburgh than what the 49ers had in Pittsburgh. Now, we've already established that we believe that line was wrong for the 49ers. But this is quite the adjustment up and or adjustment down for the Steelers in this game, right?
Yeah, they got essentially the same line playing a way worse team this week. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting for sure. So, I can't say, I bet it, so I can't say I disagree with it. So, I still have a lot of doubts about Deshaun Watson. But I also have a ton of confidence in Jim Schwartz and that new look defense. They already had a ton of talent, and it was one of the most confusing things, not only to me, but the rest of our staff, as to why the Browns defense was not good last year. It made no sense. Now Schwartz comes in, the old Eagles defensive coordinator, won a Super Bowl there, and looked better against Joe Burrow than they had before, which is a high bar to clear. So, and Kenny Pickett, I think we can now confirm that having a perfect passer rating in the preseason means jack and squat. So, if he doesn't have two of his weapons, I think this is a rough spot for the Steelers. Mike Tomlin narrative, blah, blah, blah. You still got to have the best players and play well. So as long as Deshaun Watson doesn't, pee his pants here, I think we should be okay on Cleveland. So that's the early week bet for me as of right now. Christian, any final thoughts here? Do you agree that week 2 tends to be the week where you see the biggest adjustment on team ratings when it comes to the spread? I know we had a ton of unders come in week number 1. Do you think that's just an anomaly of no preseason, or is it something we may see moving forward with a lot of teams just struggling to establish quarterbacks? Just kind of like maybe an overarching thought or opinion that you have after week 1.
Yeah, sometimes that does come into play. Just the rust factor. Some offenses just trying to get into gear. So it does tend to be more unders in those first weeks. And there also does just tend to be, just the book makers also not having the same amount of information. There's still a lot of unknowns. So trying to shape really where those numbers will be, tends to be different. And then once week 2 comes around, we've now seen some things are established, and you can kind of make a better estimate of how things are going to play out. So the lines are a little bit tighter here. You definitely have more of an edge in that week 1 when you don't see any more, but not to say that it's completely gone. There's definitely still some things you can pick at here.
Absolutely. Appreciate the insight as always. Just to let everybody know what else is coming up here on the Lines podcast feed and YouTube channel for the rest of the week. Mention Beat the Closing Number is already out from the Monday episode. Eli and Mo went through 4 games that they thought were interesting in terms of the early week line movement. And Thursday, they'll be back with their bets and a guest. And Friday, as always, is the NFL Megapod, where Adam Candy, Matt Brown, and myself go through every single game on the slate. We'll try to do it a little bit more efficiency last week. Week 1 always goes long. We almost went 2 hours last week, so it's like Christmas for us. So we'll try to be a little more efficient this week. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in here to Behind the Lines, presented by BetMGM. Be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Leave us a 5-star review if you wouldn't mind, if you're listening on the podcast feed. It goes a long way for us, and we really appreciate it. For Christian Cipollini, I'm Stephen Andress. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Best of luck in week number 2.